I want to tell you about the fluorescent lights in courtroom 4B that buzzed like angry wasps overhead. I had been staring at them for 20 minutes, trying to keep my composure while my wife's lawyer made a theatrical show of examining my clothes. He stood there announcing to the judge that he wanted to enter my last 3 pay stubs from my employment at Carmichael's Auto Repair into evidence. He flipped through his papers with deliberate slowness, drawing out the moment before revealing that I earned $1,047 per month before taxes. He let that number hang in the air like a bad smell, making sure everyone understood the implications. His client, my wife Natasha Brennan, currently earned $14,500 per month as a senior marketing director at Vanguard Strategic Communications. Their daughter, Iris, attended Willowbrook Academy. Annual tuition, $38,000. My entire annual income wouldn't even cover half of that single expense. I sat at the defendant's table wearing my blue Walmart button-down shirt that I had purchased on clearance for $12.97, and I said nothing. My lawyer, Dante Morales, a young public defender who had been assigned to my case 3 weeks earlier, shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside me. Natasha's lawyer continued his presentation, explaining that they weren't asking for anything unreasonable. Primary custody would go to his client. I would receive supervised visitation twice a month, and child support would be calculated at the standard percentage of my income, which given my financial situation would amount to approximately $427 per month. Someone in the gallery snickered at this announcement. I didn't turn to look because I already knew it was Natasha's mother, Constance, a woman who had spent the last 9 years reminding me that her daughter had married down. Judge Patricia Whitmore called my name and I looked up at her. She was in her mid-50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind of face that had seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She asked me over her reading glasses if I had anything to say in response to opposing counsel's characterization of my financial situation. I glanced at Dante, who gave me a small nod. We had discussed this moment beforehand. I told the judge no, not at this time. Natasha's lawyer actually laughed right there in open court. He started to say that my silence spoke volumes, that I knew I couldn't provide for my daughter, but Judge Whitmore cut him off sharply. She reminded Desmond Langford that she hadn't asked for his commentary. She had asked me a question, and I had answered it. Langford, who was a partner at Sterling, and Langford charging $650 an hour, had the grace to look slightly chastised and apologized. Judge Whitmore shuffled some papers and explained that before they proceeded with final arguments, she needed to confirm some details for the record. She looked at me again and asked me to state my full legal name. I took a breath because this was the moment I had been waiting for. I stated my name clearly, Thaddeus Roland Brennan. The name echoed in the quiet courtroom. Judge Whitmore's pen stopped moving mid-stroke. She looked up at me slowly, and I watched the color drain from her face like water circling a sink. She asked me to repeat what I had just said, her voice suddenly careful and measured. I repeated my full name clearly. She stared at me for a long moment before turning to her clerk, a young woman with red hair and nervous hands, and whispered something I couldn't hear from where I sat. The clerk's eyes went wide with shock. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor, and then she was rushing toward the door behind the judge's bench, with her heels clicking frantically against the tile. Desmond Langford frowned and asked if there was a problem. Judge Whitmore didn't answer him. She was still looking at me, but her expression had transformed completely. The cool authority she had maintained throughout the proceedings was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. It was fear. Natasha leaned over to her lawyer and began whispering urgently. I caught fragments of her questions about what was happening and why the judge had reacted that way to my name. The side door opened, and 2 men entered the courtroom wearing dark suits and moving with the practiced efficiency of people who did this every day. I recognized the badges on their belts, identifying them as federal marshals. They walked directly to the plaintiff's table where Natasha sat. The first marshal addressed my wife by her full name, Natasha Elaine Brennan. My soon-to-be ex-wife looked up at them with confusion written across her face. She asked what this was about, reminding them she was in the middle of a custody hearing. The marshal pulled out a document, and informed her that she was under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of government funds, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Natasha screamed, actually screamed with a primal sound of shock and denial that bounced off the wood-paneled walls. She insisted this was insane, and that she hadn't done anything wrong. Desmond Langford was on his feet immediately, calling the interruption outrageous and telling the judge that his client was in the middle of legal proceedings. Whatever this was, he insisted, it could wait. The second marshal was already moving behind Natasha with handcuffs that caught the fluorescent light. He told the counselor that it could not wait, that the warrant had been signed by a federal judge 2 hours ago, and that his client had the right to remain silent. Anything she said could and would be used against her in a court of law. Natasha's eyes found mine across the chaos. Mascara was already running down her cheeks as her carefully applied makeup dissolved under the weight of her panic. She called out my name and demanded to know what I had done. I didn't answer. I just sat there in my $12.97 Walmart shirt and watched the woman who had spent the last 18 months telling me I was worthless get dragged out of a courtroom in handcuffs. My name is Thad Brennan, though most people call me Thad. 3 years ago, I was a senior investigator for the Department of Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, known as FinCEN. I had a security clearance, a 6-figure salary, and access to information that could topple corporations and imprison executives. Then I gave it all up and walked away from everything to become a mechanic at a small auto shop in suburban Maryland. I didn't make this change because I had to. I did it because I was hunting something, hunting someone. After 1,027 days of playing the fool, of letting my wife and her family believe I was nothing, of enduring every insult and humiliation they could throw at me, the trap finally closed. Let me take you back to where this really started. In September of 2021, I was at the top of my career. I had spent 15 years with FinCEN and had been promoted to Senior Investigator in the Complex Financial Crimes Division. My job involved tracking money and following the threads of fraud, embezzlement, and corruption through shell companies and offshore accounts. I was good at it. Better than good, actually. I had helped build cases that put 3 hedge fund managers, a state senator, and the CFO of a Fortune 500 company behind bars. Natasha and I had been married for 6 years at that point. We had met at a charity event in Washington, D.C. She was working in public relations for a nonprofit, and I was there representing Treasury at some interagency function. She was beautiful and confident, the kind of woman who made every room feel smaller just by walking into it. Iris came along 2 years after the wedding. The day she was born, I held her in my arms and cried. This perfect little human who was half me and half the woman I loved. I swore I would protect her forever. For 4 years I thought we were happy. I was wrong about that. The first sign should have been the job change. Natasha left her nonprofit position for Vanguard Strategic Communications, a boutique marketing firm that paid almost triple her previous salary. The CEO, a man named Silas Blackwood, had recruited her personally. She told me over dinner that it was an incredible opportunity and that Silas thought she had executive potential. He wanted to mentor her. I was happy for her, proud even. My wife was becoming a rising star. I didn't notice the late nights at first because my own hours were unpredictable. Financial crimes don't follow a 9-to-5 schedule. When Natasha started coming home at 10 or 11, sometimes midnight, I assumed she was just working hard. I didn't really notice the new clothes either. She had always liked nice things, and now she could afford them. The designer handbags and expensive shoes seemed like she was just treating herself with her new salary. What I did notice was the distance growing between us. We stopped talking about our days, stopped eating dinner together, stopped everything that had made us feel like partners. Iris became the only thread connecting us. We orbited around her like 2 planets that had forgotten they were supposed to share the same sun. When I tried to bring it up, Natasha told me I was imagining things. She said she was just stressed and that work was demanding. I pointed out that we barely saw each other anymore. She turned it around and suggested that maybe I should work fewer hours instead of blaming her for working more. The fight started after that exchange, small ones at first, then bigger. Every conversation became a battlefield. Every question I asked was controlling in her eyes. Every concern I raised was paranoid. In October of 2021, I came home early from a conference in New York. My flight had been canceled due to weather, and I had managed to get on an earlier one instead. I found Natasha in our bedroom with Silas Blackwood. The cliché of it almost made me laugh. The husband coming home unexpectedly, the wife scrambling for clothes, the other man smooth and silver-haired, reeking of expensive cologne, trying to maintain his dignity while buttoning his shirt. Natasha stammered that it wasn't what I thought. I told her it was exactly what I thought. Silas Blackwood stepped forward with his hands raised like he was calming a wild animal. He suggested we all just take a breath and reminded me that these things happen and that adults can discuss this rationally. I looked at him, really looked at him. I had been doing this job for 15 years, and I knew how to read people, their micro-expressions and tells, the tiny movements that revealed what they were really thinking. In that moment, looking at Silas Blackwood, I saw something that went beyond simple adultery. I saw arrogance and the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. I told him to get out of my house quietly and immediately, before I threw him out. He left, and Natasha followed him to the door, whispering something I couldn't hear. When she came back, her expression had changed. The guilt was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something calculated. She told me she wanted a divorce. I said fine. She blinked because she had expected me to fight, to beg, to give her leverage. All I said was fine, and that was all. She asked if that was all I had to say. I asked her what she wanted me to say. She had been sleeping with her boss, and our marriage was over. She crossed her arms and told me she wanted the house. She wanted primary custody of Iris. And she wanted me to understand that Silas had very good lawyers. I told her I was sure he did. She asked if I wasn't going to fight her on this. I thought about Iris and about the life we had built, and about all the hours I had spent away from home chasing criminals and thinking I was making a difference. And I thought about Silas Blackwood's face and that absolute confidence he displayed. Something clicked in my investigator's brain, a pattern I had seen before in dozens of cases. I told her no, I wasn't going to fight her. Not yet anyway. That night after Natasha went to stay at a friend's house, which was almost certainly Silas's penthouse, I sat in my home office and started digging. Vanguard Strategic Communications had always struck me as odd. It was a small marketing firm that somehow landed contracts with major corporations and government agencies. A CEO who lived like a billionaire, despite running a company with only 40 employees. A client list that included defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and 3 different federal agencies. It took me 2 hours to find the first irregularity. It took me 2 weeks to understand the scope of what I was looking at. Silas Blackwood wasn't just running a marketing firm. He was running a money laundering operation, and my wife was right in the middle of it. I should have reported it immediately because that's what protocol demanded. I was a federal investigator who had discovered potential financial crimes. The correct procedure was to document everything, hand it over to my superiors, and let the system take its course. But there was a problem. Silas Blackwood had connections, serious connections. His client list included people with the power to make investigations disappear, to transfer inconvenient agents, to bury evidence, to ensure that certain names never appeared in certain reports. I had seen it happen before. Good cases with solid evidence and witnesses who were ready to testify, all of it evaporating because someone made a phone call to someone else who owed them a favor. If I reported through normal channels, there was a very real chance that Silas would find out. If Silas found out, the evidence would vanish. Worse, my daughter was living in a house with a man running a criminal enterprise. If I moved too fast and spooked him, Iris could be caught in the crossfire. So I made a decision that would cost me everything and eventually give me everything back. I went to the one person I trusted absolutely, my mentor at FinCEN named Kowalski Ashford. He was 63 years old, 3 years from retirement, and the most incorruptible man I had ever known. We met at a diner in Bethesda, the kind of place where nobody looked twice at two men in suits having a quiet conversation. Kowalski asked if I was sure about what I had found. I told him I had traced $47 million through Vanguard Strategic Communications in the last 18 months alone. Shell companies in Delaware, offshore accounts in the Caymans, fake consulting fees to entities that didn't exist. And that was just what I could find with limited access. He asked about my wife. I stirred my coffee and explained that she had been signing off on invoices and authorizing payments. Whether she knew what she was really doing, I shook my head. I didn't know. Maybe she did, and maybe she had convinced herself it was just creative accounting. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care. I didn't answer that last possibility because I didn't want to think about it. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment before saying the thing I had been afraid he would say. He told me I needed to step back because I was too close to this. Conflict of interest didn't even begin to describe the situation. I told him I knew. He continued that if anyone found out I had been investigating my own wife's employer, I could lose my job, my clearance, everything. I said I knew that too. He asked what I wanted from him. I told him I needed to disappear from FinCEN quietly, with a reason that didn't raise red flags. He asked if I wanted to go undercover. I said sort of, but not officially. I wanted to step down and resign, make it look like the divorce had destroyed me, like I couldn't handle the stress. I explained that if I was still an investigator, Silas's people would be watching me because they monitored federal employees. I had seen the files, but if I was just another burned-out government worker whose wife had left him for a rich guy, nobody would pay attention to the losers. Kowalski asked what I would do while playing the loser. I told him I would keep digging quietly and off the books, building a case that was so airtight and so comprehensive that by the time I brought it forward, there would be no way anyone could make it disappear. Kowalski shook his head slowly and told me I was talking about years of pretending to be something I wasn't. Years of watching my wife and daughter live with the man I was trying to destroy. I told him I knew what I was talking about. He asked what would happen if Natasha got full custody and I lost access to Iris entirely. My jaw tightened as I responded that then I would lose access temporarily. But when this was over, and Silas Blackwood was in prison and Natasha was facing charges, I would get her back for good. He pointed out that I was gambling everything on this approach. I disagreed. I told him I was gambling everything on the truth. The truth always comes out, I reminded him. He had taught me that himself. Sometimes it just needs a little help. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation from FinCEN, citing personal reasons related to my ongoing divorce. 3 months after that, I was working at Carmichael's Auto Repair, making $17 an hour, and living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like mildew. The investigation had begun. I spent the next 2.5 years building my case in the shadows. During the days, I fixed cars, handling brake pads and oil changes and transmission repairs. My coworkers thought I was just another middle-aged guy who had hit rock bottom after his marriage fell apart. They would clap me on the shoulder after work, buy me beers, and tell me it would get better. During the nights, I became someone else entirely. I had set up a secure workspace in my apartment with encrypted drives, VPN connections, and burner phones. Everything was compartmentalized and nothing was traceable. Kowalski fed me information when he could, but mostly I worked alone, following the money thread by thread. Silas Blackwood's operation was bigger than I had initially realized. Vanguard Strategic Communications was just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath it was a network of shell companies spanning 12 countries, moving money for clients who couldn't afford to have their names attached to certain transactions. Drug cartels in Mexico, arms dealers in Eastern Europe, corrupt politicians across 3 continents. At the center of it all, pulling the strings, was Silas Blackwood, a man who had convinced the world he was just a successful marketing executive with a taste for expensive wine. Natasha's role became clearer as I dug deeper. She wasn't just an unwitting participant. She was actively managing the money flows, creating fake invoices, and coordinating with offshore banks. Whether she had started as an innocent dupe or had known from the beginning, I couldn't say. But by the time I had enough evidence, she was in too deep to claim ignorance. The hardest part wasn't the investigation itself. The hardest part was Iris. The custody agreement gave me weekends, 2 days every other week. Natasha fought even that arrangement, arguing that my unstable lifestyle made me an unsuitable influence. I heard her tell the mediator that I worked at a car repair shop and lived in a studio apartment. What kind of example was that for our daughter? I didn't fight back because I couldn't afford to look like I had resources or anything worth protecting, so I took what I could get and made every minute count. Iris was confused at first. She didn't understand why Daddy had left his important job, why he lived in a small apartment now, why he couldn't buy her the things Mom and Silas could. She asked me once during one of our weekends if I was poor now. I told her I had everything I needed and that I had her. She said that Silas told her I had given up, that I couldn't handle the pressure. It took everything I had not to react to that. I told her that people say a lot of things, but what matters is what's true. She asked me what was true. I pulled her into a hug and told her that I loved her more than anything in the world, and that one day she would understand why Daddy made the choices he made. She didn't understand then, but she would eventually. By early 2024, I had everything I needed. 12 shell companies documented, $127 million in traceable illegal transactions, bank records and emails and recorded conversations. A web of evidence so comprehensive that even Silas Blackwood's expensive lawyers wouldn't be able to spin their way out of it. But I had one problem, which was timing. If I brought this to the authorities now, Natasha would be arrested immediately. That meant Iris would be placed in temporary custody, either with Natasha's parents who despised me, or with foster care. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to control the moment of impact. Then Natasha handed me the perfect opportunity. The divorce had been finalized a year earlier, but she had never stopped trying to squeeze me. Child support modifications, custody adjustments, endless legal harassment designed to remind me of my place. In February of 2024, she filed a motion to reduce my visitation rights to once a month, supervised only, citing my failure to maintain appropriate living standards. Her real reason was that Silas was getting impatient. He wanted to adopt Iris, and my presence was an inconvenience. Dante Morales told me we needed to respond to this motion when it landed. He was fresh out of law school and had been assigned to my case because I qualified for legal aid. He was a good kid, earnest, and completely out of his depth. I told him not to respond. He was confused and pointed out that if we didn't respond, she would win by default and I could lose my daughter entirely. I told him to let her think she was winning and to let her file for a full custody hearing. He asked why I would want that. I looked at him and explained that I needed her in a courtroom on a specific date in front of a specific judge. Dante stared at me and asked what I wasn't telling him. I said there was a lot I wasn't telling him, but I needed him to trust me. He pointed out that he was my lawyer and I was supposed to tell him everything. I said not this time and put a hand on his shoulder. When this was over, I would explain, but right now, I needed him to do exactly what I said. Let her have her hearing, and let her think she had won. When we walked into that courtroom, he shouldn't say a word unless I told him to. He said this was insane. I agreed it probably was, and asked if he would do it. Dante looked at me for a long moment. Whatever he saw in my face must have convinced him because he finally nodded. He said fine. But if this blew up in my face, he was going to say he told me so. I told him that was fair enough. The hearing was scheduled for June 17th. I had 4 months to put the final pieces in place. The first piece was Kowalski Ashford. He had retired from FinCEN 6 months earlier, but his contacts remained intact. More importantly, he had relationships with people at the FBI and Department of Justice who could be trusted, people who wouldn't tip off Silas Blackwood. Kowalski asked if everything was ready when I met him at our usual diner. I slid a hard drive across the table and told him it contained everything. 3 years of investigation, every transaction, every shell company, every name. Kowalski picked up the drive and turned it over in his hands. He reminded me that once he handed this over, there would be no taking it back, and that they would move fast. I told him I knew. He said Natasha could do serious time, possibly years. I said I knew that too. He asked if I was okay with that, pointing out that she was Iris's mother. I thought about my daughter and about the life she had been living, surrounded by luxury bought with blood money, raised by a woman who had chosen wealth over integrity. I told Kowalski that Iris deserved to know the truth about her mother, about Silas, about all of it. She deserved the chance to grow up without lies. Kowalski nodded slowly and asked when I wanted them to move. I told him June 17th because there was a custody hearing scheduled, and I wanted Natasha served in the courtroom. He observed that this approach was theatrical. I corrected him and said it was justice. Kowalski smiled, which was a rare expression for him. He told me I always did have a flair for the dramatic. The second piece was Judge Patricia Whitmore. I had researched every family court judge in the district. Most of them were compromised in one way or another through campaign contributions from law firms or social connections to wealthy donors. But Whitmore was different. Her brother had been killed by a drunk driver 20 years ago. The driver was a hedge fund manager who had hired expensive lawyers and walked away with probation. Whitmore had dedicated her career to ensuring that money couldn't buy justice in her courtroom. More importantly, she had been a federal prosecutor before becoming a judge, and she still had contacts at the Department of Justice. She would recognize the significance of my name the moment I said it. The third piece was the timing. The FBI agreed to execute the arrest warrant at exactly 10:45 in the morning on June 17th, 15 minutes into the hearing. Long enough for Natasha and her lawyer to establish their arrogance on the record, short enough that they wouldn't have time to sense the trap closing. Everything was in place. All I had to do was walk into that courtroom in my Walmart shirt and let them underestimate me one last time. On the morning of June 17th, I woke up early because I couldn't sleep anyway. I showered and shaved and put on the cheapest clothes I owned. The blue button-down from Walmart, khaki pants I had bought at Goodwill, scuffed shoes that had seen better days. I looked at myself in the mirror. For 3 years I had played this role of the broken man, the failure, the ex-husband who couldn't compete with his wife's billionaire boyfriend. Today, the performance would end. My phone buzzed with a text from Kowalski confirming that assets were in position and giving me the green light. He wished me good luck. I took a deep breath and walked out the door. It was time to take my daughter back. The chaos in courtroom 4B lasted approximately 7 minutes. Natasha screamed the entire time they put the handcuffs on her. She screamed at me and screamed at the Marshals and screamed at Desmond Langford to do something. Langford tried his best, objecting and demanding explanations and threatening lawsuits, but federal warrants don't care about billable hours. When they finally dragged her out, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Whitmore removed her glasses and looked at me. She asked if she should call me Mr. Brennan or former Special Investigator Brennan. I told her Thad was fine. She studied me for a long moment and said that she had reviewed the summary affidavit the FBI had provided that morning. In 23 years on the bench, she had never seen anything quite like this. I apologized for the disruption to her courtroom. She told me not to apologize. A hint of something, maybe admiration, flickered across her face. She observed that my ex-wife's attorney had spent the last hour telling her I was an unfit father because I worked at an auto repair shop. Meanwhile, I had been conducting a 3-year undercover investigation that just brought down one of the largest money laundering operations on the East Coast. Langford, still standing at the plaintiff's table, had gone pale. He started to say that he had no knowledge of his client's activities, but Judge Whitmore cut him off. She told him to save it because he was going to have bigger problems than this custody case once the FBI started looking at Vanguard's strategic communications legal representation. Langford sat down heavily. Judge Whitmore turned back to me and explained that given the circumstances she was suspending all custody arrangements pending a full review. However, based on the evidence presented today and the obvious unsuitability of the mother's current living situation, she was granting me temporary emergency custody of my daughter, effective immediately. I closed my eyes. 3 years and 1,027 days of playing the fool, and now finally Iris was coming home. Judge Whitmore called my name and I opened my eyes. She told me to get my daughter, and next time I was in her courtroom, she almost smiled. I could wear whatever I wanted. The school was only 15 minutes away. I drove in silence with my hands steady on the wheel. The adrenaline was fading and being replaced by something quieter. It didn't feel like triumph or victory. It felt like finally setting down a weight I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten what it was like to stand up straight. Willowbrook Academy was everything Natasha had wanted for Iris. Stone buildings, manicured lawns, students in pressed uniforms walking between classes. A $38,000 per year monument to the belief that money could buy your children a better future. I parked in the visitor lot where my 12-year-old Honda Civic looked distinctly out of place among the BMWs and Range Rovers, and I walked to the administrative office. I told the receptionist I was there to pick up Iris Brennan and that I had a court order for emergency custody. 20 minutes later, after phone calls to the court and verification of the paperwork, Iris appeared in the doorway of the waiting room. She looked confused and scared. She was wearing her school uniform with the plaid skirt and white blouse and the Willowbrook Academy crest embroidered on her blazer. She asked what was going on because they had pulled her out of class. I stood up and greeted her. She asked where her mom was because she was supposed to pick her up that day. I walked over to her and knelt down so we were at eye level. She was 11 now, almost 12. Not a little girl anymore, but not yet a teenager either. She was old enough to sense that something was seriously wrong. I told her I needed to tell her something and I needed her to be brave. Her eyes widened and she asked if her mom was okay and if she was hurt. I explained that she wasn't hurt, but she was in trouble. Legal trouble. She had done some things that were wrong and now she had to answer for them. Iris asked what kind of things. I took her hands in mine and reminded her about when she had asked me why I stopped working at my old job and why I started fixing cars instead. She nodded slowly. I explained that I had stopped because I found out that some people close to us, were doing bad things, hurting people and breaking the law. I paused before continuing that her mom had been helping them. I didn't know if she understood how serious it was at first, but she was part of it. Iris's face crumpled and she said no, that her mom wouldn't do that, that she wasn't a criminal, that she was her mom. I told her I knew, and that her mom still loved her. That hadn't changed. She asked through tears why I had to tell on her, why I couldn't just leave it alone. I pulled her into a hug. She resisted at first with her body rigid from anger and confusion, but then she collapsed against me sobbing. I told her it was because the truth matters, even when it hurts, and even when it's easier to look away. I stroked her hair and explained that her mom made choices, bad choices, and those choices have consequences. But that didn't mean she did anything wrong, and it didn't mean anyone stopped loving her. She said she wanted to see her. I promised her she would, but that right now she was coming home with me. She pulled back and looked at me with red eyes and a face blotchy from tears. She pointed out that my apartment was too small. Despite everything, I almost laughed. I agreed that it was and told her we would figure something out. She said she didn't want to leave her school. I told her we would talk about that too. She said she didn't want any of this. I told her I knew and that neither did I. I stood up and took her hand. She didn't pull away. She called my name and I responded. She asked if I really worked at a car repair shop this whole time just to catch her mom. I thought about all those nights in my cramped apartment, poring over financial records while my neighbors played music through the thin walls. All those days under car hoods with grease on my hands, pretending to be someone I wasn't. I told her not just to catch her mom, but to protect her, to make sure that when the truth came out, she would have somewhere safe to land. Iris was quiet for a moment before finally saying that was kind of badass. I laughed, a real laugh, the first one in longer than I could remember. I told her not to say badass. She pointed out that I just said it. I said I was a grown-up. She squeezed my hand and said whatever. We walked out of Willowbrook Academy together past the stone buildings and manicured lawns, past the BMWs and Range Rovers. My Honda Civic was waiting in the visitor lot looking exactly as out of place as it had when I arrived. Iris looked at it, and then at me. She said we were definitely getting a better car eventually, right? I told her eventually, and she made me promise. I opened the passenger door for her and promised. She climbed in, and I walked around to the driver's side. As I started the engine, I glanced at the Willowbrook Academy sign in my rearview mirror. I thought about Natasha sitting in a federal holding facility waiting to be processed. I thought about Silas Blackwood, whose arrest had happened simultaneously at his downtown office. I thought about Desmond Langford, who was probably already on the phone with his own lawyer. And I thought about the past 3 years, every sacrifice and every humiliation and every moment of doubt. It had all led here to this moment, to my daughter in the passenger seat, to the truth finally out in the open, to the beginning of something new. Iris called my name and I responded. She said she was starving and asked if we could get McDonald's. I smiled and told her yes, we could get McDonald's. The trials took 18 months. Silas Blackwood went first, and the evidence was overwhelming. $127 million in documented illegal transactions, testimony from cooperating witnesses, a paper trail that even his team of defense attorneys couldn't explain away. He was convicted on 34 counts of money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison. I was in the gallery when the verdict came down. Silas looked at me as they led him away in handcuffs. There was no arrogance left in his face, just the hollow expression of a man who had finally run out of moves. I didn't say anything because I didn't need to. Natasha's trial was harder to watch. The prosecutors offered her a deal to testify against Silas and plead guilty to reduced charges. She refused at first because she was convinced that Silas's lawyers would somehow get them both off, that his connections would save them. They didn't. When she finally accepted the plea deal, it was too late for the best terms. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of government funds, and obstruction of justice. The judge gave her 7 years. Iris cried when I told her, not the angry tears from that first day at Willowbrook Academy, but something quieter and sadder. The tears of a child who was finally understanding that her mother wasn't who she had pretended to be. She asked if she could visit her. I told her, of course, as often as she wanted. She asked if her mother would hate her for living with me. I pulled her close and told her that her mother loved her, and that whatever mistakes she made, that was never a lie. She knew this wasn't Iris's fault, that none of it was. Iris said it felt like it was. I told her I knew, but that feelings aren't always true. She visited Natasha once a month. I drove her to the facility, waited in the parking lot, and drove her home. I never asked what they talked about because that was between them. Slowly and painfully, we rebuilt our lives. I left Carmichael's auto repair, and Sterling Carmichael actually cried when I told him I was leaving. He said I was the best mechanic he ever had, even if I was some kind of secret government agent the whole time. I told him I was just an investigator and I wasn't lying about loving the work. There was something honest about fixing things with your hands. He told me if I ever wanted to come back, the bay was always open. I shook his hand and told him I appreciated that more than he knew. I was offered my old position at FinCEN, actually better than that, a supervisory role with a significant raise. The agency was happy to have me back, especially after the Blackwood case made national headlines. I turned it down because 3 years of undercover work had changed me. I didn't want to spend my life in an office anymore chasing paper trails and filing reports. I wanted something different. I used the back pay I had accumulated during my resignation, which turned out Kowalski had quietly arranged for my salary to continue through a discretionary fund to buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a garage where I could still tinker with cars on weekends. Nothing fancy, just enough. Iris transferred to a public school in the fall. She complained at first because Willowbrook Academy had been all she had known, but within a month she had made friends and joined the soccer team and started talking about how real everything felt. I asked her what she meant by real. She explained that at Willowbrook everyone was pretending all the time, pretending to be rich and pretending to be happy and pretending to like each other. She shrugged and said that here people were just people. I asked if that was better. She said yeah, she thought it was. I started consulting for law enforcement agencies including the FBI, Department of Justice, and occasionally Treasury, financial crimes investigation, training programs for new agents, expert testimony in major cases. The work was flexible and well paid, and it let me be home every evening for dinner. Kowalski Ashford came to visit once about a year after everything ended. We sat on my back porch drinking beer and watching Iris kick a soccer ball around the yard. Kowalski told me I had done something remarkable, that 3 years was a long time and most people would have cracked. I said most people don't have a daughter to protect. He pointed out that wasn't the only reason. I could have reported everything the moment I discovered it and taken the quick win, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. Silas had too many connections and the case would have disappeared. I said maybe, or maybe I just wanted to make sure there was no escape. Kowalski smiled and said I always was thorough, too thorough according to my ex-wife. I asked how Natasha was doing. I watched Iris score an imaginary goal against an imaginary goalkeeper while I answered. I said she was surviving and that she had started taking classes in accounting of all things. She said she wanted to understand what she was actually doing all those years. Kowalski asked if I believed her. I said I believed she wanted to be better, but whether she would actually change, I shrugged because that wasn't up to me. He asked how Iris was handling all of it. I told him she was resilient and stronger than I expected. I paused before sharing that she had asked me the previous week if I thought her mom was a bad person. Kowalski asked what I said. I told him I said her mom was a person who made bad choices, that there was a difference, and that people can change if they really want to. He asked if I believed that. I thought about Natasha, about the woman I had married, the woman I had discovered in our bedroom with another man, the woman I had watched get dragged out of a courtroom in handcuffs. I finally said I believed in second chances and that the worst thing you've done doesn't have to be the last thing you do. But I also believed that forgiveness has to be earned, and some things take a long time to earn back. Kowalski nodded slowly and said that was a good answer. I told him it was the only one I had. Iris came running over all sweaty and grinning, asking if I saw that goal. I told her I saw it and compared it to a famous soccer player. She asked who that was, and I looked at Kowalski and said I was officially old. He told me to join the club. Later that night, after Kowalski had gone and Iris was asleep, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet, with the kind of quiet I used to dread in my studio apartment, but now felt peaceful. On the coffee table sat a framed photograph, the only one I had kept from my old life. Iris at 3 years old, laughing at something off camera with her whole face lit up with joy. That little girl had no idea what was coming, no idea that her parents' marriage would implode, that her mother would go to prison, that her father would spend 3 years pretending to be a failure just to protect her. But she had survived, and we both had. I thought about Desmond Langford laughing at my Walmart shirt. I thought about Judge Whitmore's face when she heard my name. I thought about Natasha screaming as they dragged her out of the courtroom. And I thought about the lesson all of it had taught me. People will underestimate you. They'll look at your clothes and your job and your bank account and think they know your worth. They'll laugh at you and dismiss you and write you off as nothing. Let them. Because the truth doesn't care about appearances. The truth doesn't care about designer suits or expensive lawyers or how much money you have in the bank. The truth just waits, patient as stone, until the moment comes to reveal itself. And when that moment comes, everything changes. Sometimes Iris asks me if I regret it. Those 3 years of my life spent pretending to be broken. 3 years of oil changes and brake jobs and living in a studio apartment while my ex-wife hosted dinner parties at a billionaire's mansion. I tell her the same thing every time. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Not for revenge, because revenge is hollow. It fills you up for a moment and leaves you emptier than before. I did it for the truth. I did it because some things are more important than comfort, and more important than pride, and more important than what other people think of you. I did it because my daughter deserved to grow up knowing that her father would never stop fighting for her no matter what it cost and no matter how long it took. So here's my question for you. What would you sacrifice to protect the people you love? How far would you go to make sure the truth came out? I went to a courtroom in a $12 shirt and let them laugh at me. I spent 3 years as a nobody waiting for the perfect moment to reveal everything. And if I had to do it all over again, I would wear the same shirt.